Welcome to our policy orientation, the biggest one yet. And I'm particularly delighted to be moderating this panel of three very good friends of mine and three really of the leaders who are most responsible for criminal justice reform being successful in Texas and across the nation. I think all of you are familiar with, of course, the First Step Act was signed by President Trump and passed by Congress right at the end of last year before, of course, the government shutdown. And so many of the comments, including those by the president about the First Step Act, focused on the results in Texas. And the fact that, of course, as I think all of you know, we've closed 8 prisons in Texas. Our crime rate's down over 30%. But there's also a lot more work to do in Texas, and I think that's what we will be hearing more today about. And I couldn't really imagine three people better qualified to talk about this than those we have with us today. First of all, Chairman John Wittmeyer, and I think everyone knows Senator Wittmeyer has been a leader on this for decades, and first was elected to the Texas Senate in 1982 and served in the House for years before that. He chairs the Senate Criminal Justice Committee and was really, along with Jerry Madden, who's a dear friend and senior fellow with us, but he and Jerry really were responsible for the Justice Reinvestment Initiative in 2007 in Texas, where we faced a crossroads and we chose a path to depart from our prior approach of continuing to build more prisons and instead invest in drug courts and other alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. Chairman Wittmeyer went to the University of Houston and is a counsel at the law firm Locke Lord, and we are really looking forward to his continued leadership this session. Our second speaker today will be Chairman James White, who heads the Corrections Committee in the Texas House. And since coming to the legislature back in 2010, he's really been a tremendous leader on this topic and has been responsible for some really important legislation that has gone through, and really, I think, has shown tremendous vision on this topic, and as well as many others. But he served in the U.S. Army with great distinction, including in the Berlin Brigade from 1987 to 1990. And he's really been a leader on so many topics in the legislature, but most of all on criminal justice. Finally, we have Jake Horowitz, who's director of the Public Safety Performance Project at the Pew Charitable Trust. And we've had the pleasure of working with Jake, I think, for at least a decade or so. And Pew has really been the national leader when it comes to trustworthy, data-driven research, looking at how many people are incarcerated, more recently, how many people are on probation and parole, and also looking at recidivism reduction, and then finally providing technical support to dozens of states across the country to engage in successful justice reinvestment efforts. Jake, in his role, oversees the Pew Public Safety Performance Project's research, technical assistance, and other efforts. He previously was at the U.S. Department of Justice, National Institute for Justice, and also legislative fellow in the U.S. House. And he has a degree from the Harvard JFK School of Government, which we won't hold against him. Anyway, with that, I'd like to kick it off to Chairman Wittmeyer to kind of talk about where he sees the most important areas to focus on in the upcoming session. Chairman?
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues up here on the floor, and I'm impressed by the attendance. You've come a long ways, Mark, to draw a crowd like this. You know, I could spend a lot of time talking about our accomplishments. We've come a long ways. I actually started chairing in 2003, and it was a very broken criminal justice system, a revolving door, very little treatment, no classification. I mean, it was really detrimental. You served 1 month for every year that you were sent to prison. So we got busy, built a lot of prisons, rewrote the penal code. We're still the toughest state in the nation for violent offenders, which I don't apologize for. And we have made significant steps in treatment, but I would quickly say we have a lot left to do. We still have a lot of people. First of all, I will I will emphatically say we over-incarcerate still. This afternoon, we probably have 300 prostitutes incarcerated in Gatesville at an expense to the taxpayers. They need to be in their community, learning life skills, many of them there because they were victims of human trafficking. So we focus correctly on human trafficking because we have victims of that terrible practice, but the law still calls them prostitutes that they're forced into. So we got that to work on. But in general, we're over-incarcerating, and just another example of where we have more treatment to do, we have at any given day about 5,500, over 5,000 individuals incarcerated for DWIs. Now, I understand DWI will kill you just like a gun will, but it is unconscionable to me that we would send somebody to prison for their third DWI, they spend upwards of 5 years there and don't receive one day, not one day of treatment for their alcoholism. They're released to the streets of Texas and they're going to reoffend. It's nuts. And I could go through our system and say where we've got work to do. Obviously, we've got to deal with mental health. The state doesn't have a mental health system unless you get incarcerated in a county jail, and then you don't get any real treatment. Harris County has a diversion program that the state funds, but let me tell you the problem with that. You go into it, and I've talked to those individuals, first time anyone's tried to work with them on their mental health issue, they get stabilized, then we release them to the streets of Houston, where they're rearrested for vagrancy. They get on a Houston Metro bus or train to get out of the weather and go back to the jail. So, you know, we can be recognized as doing some good things. We're about 3,000 correction officers short because we have our prisons. Unfortunately, I lost that debate in the 90s. We put them in all the wrong places. We don't have the personnel to properly run those prisons. But back to specific legislation, because I'm just kind of letting you know my frustrations, and I want y'all to be involved. It's one, we've got to deal with bail bond reform. We passed a bill out of the Senate last session. We'll do it again. The Chief Justice is supporting us. You can't incarcerate people as they are today in Harris County because they can't come up with $1,000 on a nonviolent offense. Driving with suspended license, one, because they couldn't pay the driver responsibility, I think, unconscionable charge, and then they get picked up, they go to Harris County, $10,000 routine bond, they can't come up with $1,000. So they lose their job, lose their family, and I can go forward. Youth for offenders, I know Representative White and I are going to work together on this. We have about 26 individuals, young, would be juveniles when they were incarcerated, and I visited them about 3 months ago, and I assumed, like probably most of you, to be certified as an adult when you're a juvenile, you had to really do a horrendous crime. I got over there and we find about 6 individuals immediately that are nonviolent, committed fraud, took a weapon where alcohol is being served. Someone just gave up on them, and they're in an adult prison, and they don't belong there. The juvenile justice system still needs a lot of work. That Driver Responsibility Act needs to be replaced with an appropriation for trauma care. And one last thing I could talk the rest of the day, as you can imagine, probation. We have individuals taking either county jail time or state jail time because the conditions of probation are so expensive and so challenging that they're, you know, back in the holdover cell at the county jails, the inmates talk to each other and their attorneys, man, I don't want that probation. Who in the hell would want probation? Probation is supposed to keep you at home, give you a second chance. But because of the conditions of probation, they go ahead and say, just give me 6 months in the county jail or give me a year or so in the state jail. So, hey, we can celebrate our accomplishments. The feds did watch our sentencing reforms. We didn't build more prisons. We're shutting prisons, but we've got a lot of work to do. Mental health, I prioritize, and women incarcerated. I only mentioned the prostitutes. We got about 12,000 females locked up. Most of them are nonviolent, and with some treatment and mental health, and find out who was abused. A lot of them are locked up because they struck back at whoever was abusing them. So thank y'all for being here, and I look forward to hearing my colleagues.
Thank you. And of course, we'll have time for questions afterwards as well. Chairman White?
Thank you so much, Mark. And I have a big smile on my face because I'm happy to be here with you. I want to thank the TPPF folks for their leadership in many areas. But in a way, this is my 5th session, 5th conference, and it seems like we're still talking about the same stuff. And I know this is supposed to be about cost effectiveness, but real quickly here, I'm just going to talk to the Republicans. just going to talk to the Republicans. Hold on. Okay. No. I'm just going to talk to the Republicans because we're running the state now. We own it, whether it's a bad school finance situation or a dysfunctional criminal justice system, we own it. And the scenario is, I think it was back in 2012, Governor Romney on candidate quality was far ahead of then President Obama on 3 or 4 or 4 out of 5 candidate quality traits, except one which he lost extremely, extremely badly. And that was, does he care about people like me? And Romney lost that by a margin of 81-21. And then you think about, you look at all these polls and why we lose all these races and whatnot, because people ask the question, does he care about people like me? And people like me are just not people who are looking at big, burdensome property tax bills. People like me are people in people in jail trying to make bail. People like me are juveniles in these juvenile lockups. People like me are these women, as my colleague here stated, that are trapped in incarceration. So we can talk about cost effectiveness, we can do all that all day, but at the end of the day, I think this is about elections. I mean, we lost miserably again, we being the Republicans, Harris County. And I'm looking at it from East Texas, and I can figure it out. So we start off with the bail situation. I mean, Judge Rosenthal is a Republican-appointed judge, ruled against Harris County. It went to the Fifth Circuit, which I'm told is the most conservative circuit court in the nation. We lost there. And then on an emergency repeal request, Justice Thomas turned Harris County down. Now, that right there was a signal to me. I don't know what we need to do, but what we are doing is not constitutional. And we just kept fighting that and kept fighting that and kept using taxpayers' money, fighting something that was clearly unconstitutional. Civil asset forfeiture. We know there's a constitutional issue with that. I know I have DAs in here, or people who probably represent DA people, and too often we conflate issues. I'm not talking about Pablo Escobar using his drug monies to pay for his trial. I'm not talking about the pirates of the Caribbean that are using their loot. I'm talking about that lady that was cited in the Texas Tribune who lost her hoopty, her rundown car, because a family member had used it to go down and buy some drugs. That is not what civil asset forfeiture was supposed to be used for. Juveniles, raise the age. They cannot vote. I'm talking about the kids that are 16. They can't, 16, 17. They can't vote. They can't go into the military on their own. They can't get married on their own. They can't, pack a weapon without permission. But for some reason, there's a presumption that we should treat them as adults. Okay? Clemency. We got to, we don't want to do the illegal immigration, and I'm very much for that. We're searching for people to work. We've got too many people that can't work because, like a man that called me this morning that did not win clemency, he had a drug charge 22 years ago, and he cannot get it expunged. And his school district, he's a deacon of the church now, he has a family, all that good stuff, right? His school district is willing to give him a job today, but he can't do that because of can't get clemency, can't get expunctions, can't get non-disclosure, and occupational licensing. And as my friend here said, the DRP, the Driver Responsibility Program, I know what it was sold to do back in 2001, 2003, but it was a big political thing. It just got us out of the session. I wasn't here then, but I bought it since I'm in the legislature now. It collects about $71.2 million a year. That's $144 million. And no, most of the people that pay into that, either they were ticketed for not having insurance, or driving license invalid. Not driving drunk, not driving recklessly. So this session, and I'll just go ahead and just say this if I don't have enough time to say anything else. You ask me what you can do. I get it. Senator gets it. All of you get it. Representative Schaefer gets it. I need you to leave here and you go across the street and you talk to those people who vote against our bills that will correct all of this stuff and veto our bills. Many of these people, and you guys know it, I know it, money impacts people's thinking miraculously in this business of politics. I don't know what that's about. A lot of you write contribution checks to people across the street. You need to tell them to stop vetoing these bills, stop coming to our committees, committee members and our staffers saying they don't like our bills, okay? And you know the people I'm talking about, and you know the positions they hold. So if you want to see this reform, I've got the bills filed now, okay? I need you to go across the street, tell the governor, the lieutenant governor, and other members of the legislature to pass these bills now. Get them to the floor and get them out there, pass 145 to 0, 148 to 0. Thank you.
Well, as y'all know, we're not political, but good policy is good politics. So,
well, I'm sorry.
And I guess
it is what
I think
it
you
is.
Got the highest percentage of any legislator in your 86%.
Second
So I guess you can 87%. All right. So it kind of gives you the ability to stand up here and speak frankly. So thank you for that. Well, our final speaker is Jake Horowitz, who heads the Pew Public Safety Performance Project.
Thanks, Mark. So I come from a nonpartisan public charity that tries to bring the best research and facts to bear on some of today's most challenging public issues. And where that meets the issue that we're talking about on the panel today is that we've been working for more than a decade now with states that want to help get the most public safety out of every taxpayer dollar spent in the juvenile and criminal justice systems across the country. I don't know if you remember this, Senator. You probably don't. You meet a lot of people. 12 years ago, I made my first trip for Pew down here to Austin. A colleague of mine said, "You got to meet this Senator Wittmeyer." I said, "My name's Jake," and you said, "Jake, that's a good hunting dog name." I thought we were off to a real good start. And what I didn't know, that's a true story, by the way. You can see how honest that was for a guy. It is a good name. And what I couldn't have known at the time was that I was on this this really privileged moment where the organization I work for, Pew, got to play this very, very modest role in two really big efforts that we're launching right then. The first effort was what you were doing, Senator, along with your colleague, Representative Madden in the House, to launch this really big movement here. Not just for Texas, but it rippled beyond the borders of this state and started a chain of events that went now to more than 36 states, where leaders from both major political parties said, we're going to take a fresh look at our sentencing and correction systems, and we're going to demand more public safety at less taxpayer expense. And the second major effort was one that, Mark, you and your colleagues led here from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where you have led a national effort to create a new right of center voice for what conservatives want out of criminal justice systems, one that's aligned with values of limited government and personal responsibility and family first, but also second chances. Now, more than a decade later, I know Senator, I know you're charging for it, and you're like, what do we have to do next? But I think it's worth pausing and looking back. 10 years later, there's 7,000 or 8,000 fewer people behind bars. You've closed 8 facilities. You've spared taxpayers an aversion of several billion dollars they otherwise would have spent building prisons. And the crime rate, which was falling before these reforms began, has continued to fall. It's 35% lower than it was in 2007. You have less crime. You have fewer people behind bars. That is a win-win. Those are costs. Right? Taxpayer costs are costs. Crime is a cost. If you have less of both, if you have fewer people behind bars and less crime, you're ahead on both ledgers. That kind of portfolio thinking, this is, if the question is, how do we get cost-effective governance in the area of justice and public safety, that kind of portfolio thinking is what Texas started and has now been exported to other states. If you think about the way, everyone here, or a lot of people here probably have their own, personal retirement account, and you're supposed to go in there and rebalance the money, and you're supposed to move it from the stocks and bonds that aren't performing to the ones that are. That's what you guys are doing with your criminal justice system every year. You're thinking about which policies are performing well, where should the money be, and moving it to things that do better. And that kind of thinking hasn't always been done. Sometimes we gave a pass to policies, or we gave a pass to some of the investments. We weren't looking where they're performing well. And that creates more victims or unnecessary victims, that squanders taxpayer resources. And I think this new way of thinking about policies and the allocation of resources in the criminal justice system is what you guys helped foment. But I also agree with where you guys were going, which is we can't rest on our laurels. If you're not moving ahead, you're moving back in this space. So the other thing I think that's really important that's happened is now that you've got another 24 states that have adopted new policies in the juvenile and criminal justice spaces, we've been learning along the way about what does work. And we've actually been doing some very rigorous policy evaluation to find out what can we implement, borrow from this state and adopt in another state. Not cookie cutter stuff, but good policy ideas that can be tailored to your states. So I want to offer 2 quick observations here, with every caveat and asterisk you can imagine, because I know far, far less about Texas than these 2 gentlemen have forgotten in recent memory. So the first thing is, and I'm going to pick up on what you were talking about with probation there. We put out a report recently on the high stakes and missed opportunities in probation and parole in this country. Right now in Texas, about 1 in every 43 adults is under probation or parole supervision. That's about 482,900 individuals. One of the questions is, could we have slightly fewer people under probation or parole supervision with no increase in recidivism and shift the resources that we save either back into into people's personal pocketbook, or focus them on the folks who are having trouble towing the line. Focus those resources on the higher risk individuals. Missouri adopted an earned compliance policy similar to good time for inmates, and they found the answer was yes. So they shortened length of supervision for people on probation and parole. They reduced caseloads, focusing them on the higher risk individuals, and they found no change in recidivism for the people who were discharged from probation and parole early. Less supervision, no change in recidivism. Now, you might say, well, why is it at all important to have 500,000 people on supervision in Texas? Well, one of the reasons is because a lot of those people end up back behind bars. Now, it's kind of hard to track down these numbers, but I started poking around online this past week. And depending on what year you look at, and if you're looking at state jails or the State Department of Corrections, somewhere, I'll just say this, it's one of the primary drivers of the admissions into your state jails and your State Department of Corrections. So probation and parole, which are supposed to be an alternative to incarceration, are in fact one of the leading drivers of admissions into your residential facilities. So one of the questions is, could we find some way of limiting those revocations into incarceration settings, or limiting the amount of time people are revoked into these settings, saving some money on the beds that they then occupy, and having no impact on recidivism? And again, the answer is yes. Louisiana did this. They capped length of stay on revocations, reduced the amount of time people spent behind bars, netted more than 2,000 beds per year on this, saved $17 million per year, and there was no increase in returns to custody for new crimes. So again, you think about this portfolio idea, some changes in policy, some reallocation of resources, and what they did is they netted both public safety and taxpayer savings. So I guess I just want to wrap up there with this idea that Texas and TPPF have led on this. You've exported great ideas to other states. Those states have accepted the challenge. They've done their own innovations. They've studied those innovations, and now this knowledge can, in some sense, be imported back within your borders. You can take it or leave it. You don't need to use it, and maybe it's totally inapplicable. You guys have your own issues that you want to deal with, and I think some of those ideas have already been laid out by the senator and the representative. But the good thing is that you can now apply this knowledge to really optimize the public safety and criminal justice outcomes that your state is facing.
Well, thanks, and I'll also just add to that, about half the technical revocations of people from probation to our state prisons and jails, half of them, of these total revocations, are technical revocations, which means the person isn't alleged to have committed a new offense. They may have had an alcoholic beverage without permission, left the county without permission, missed an appointment. Not to say it's not important that people comply with their supervision terms, but using things like graduated sanctions and incentives, we can do that. And of course, the other thing is the parole system's done a really good job overall, which is a statewide system, at reducing technical revocations. So now we have a rate of 3 or 4 times higher technical revocations for people on probation, which is 120 different probation departments, some of which do a great job and some of which don't do a great job. So it's like any other government system, you've got to have accountability for results. So what we'll do is throw it open to questions, and I guess before we do that, let me follow up, because I know both you, Chairman White, and Chairman Wittmeyer mentioned bail reform, and just so people who may not be familiar with your bill, Senate Bill 1338 from last session, if you could give us a little sense of what that would do, and also how that how things shape up on that now in light of both the Harris County lawsuit and the fact that Texas Supreme Court and the Office of Court Administration have started to roll out an electronic risk assessment instrument.
Sure, and before I do, our challenge with probation is because of probationers pay for the system. We've got to get the state to pay the probation officers in those programs without depending on the probationers, because there's an encouragement to keep people on there longer. I mean, and not only that, quit wasting money in probation. You can have a non-alcohol drug offense, and you're still going to pay $40 a month for your drug and alcohol test. Makes no sense to gouge individuals to pay for probation services and employees. That's why they don't take probation. And taxpayers, now I recall we were supposed to talk about money today. That's just running up taxpayers' cost of incarceration unnecessarily because they won't take probation. So a cost factor is a driving reason. Now, bail bond. You know, I can give an example of how broken it is. Sandra Bland is good an example and a tragedy. She was stuck in the Hempstead, Waller County jail after her altercation with the DPS officer, even though, you know, she was shown to have a mental health problem the night before, but they didn't. And we've reformed that. Now there's much more thorough review of people that are taken to jail. But in her instance, on Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, she was given a $5,000 bond. So she had to come up with 10% of it, $500. She had a new job at Prairie View. She had a residency, a house. She was not a flight risk. A PR bond would have worked well. Unfortunately, she was not able to come up with the $500, and she took her own life on a Sunday. Likewise, the killer of the DPS officer, who was in jail in, help me, the Dangerfield, where was it? What was the East Texas tragedy? A person was incarcerated for having an altercation with an officer. He was given a $15,000 bond, paid the $1,500, was released and shot and killed a DPS officer, DPS officer Allen. So I know for a fact, any reasonable person can see we're giving bail to some people, the bad guys, human trafficker, large dope dealers, a cartel. It doesn't matter if you give them a $200,000 bond. They pay 10% of it, $20,000, and go back to work. But the real tragedy is the nonviolent folks. I saw a poll the other day, 80% of Americans have absolutely no money set aside for emergencies. They can't come up with $1,000 to go back to their family and to jobs. They are not a flight risk. PR bonds in some communities, Travis County uses large numbers. Harris County did not. Dallas and others are also facing the challenges. We have to get realistic. Harris County yesterday, with its new elected officials, decided to settle the case. It's strictly, in all due respect to the bail bond industry, it's a business decision, and it's been influenced in state policy for too many years. So the bill last session required judges to use risk assessment. Look and see what's the nature of the crime, what's the profile of the confinee, and you use the least severe restrictions and requirements of bail. On the other hand, if you see the person is a risk, if the person is a risk, actually we had a constitutional amendment, Mark, that we pulled down because it got too complicated. I would like to, James, consider a constitutional amendment that would actually allow judges to deny bond if they think the person is a public danger. It's just crazy to me that you see these violent offenders and repeat offenders get to post bond. Likewise, getting back to the economic circumstances, you know what we require them to do? This is how unconscionable it is. I know for a fact people will plead guilty to a crime that they just told their lawyer that they didn't commit, when the lawyer says in Harris County, your next court date is a month from now. And he says, well, I didn't do it, but I can't get back to my mechanical job at a car dealership. I'll lose my house, my family. Just show me guilty. So you have people pleading guilty so they can go back to work. Likewise, you have families go get a payday lender loan, a car title loan to pay the bond. So it's really an abusive system. The federal courts have struck it down. And my message to the bail bond industry is, wouldn't you rather James and I and the legislators come up with regulations than a federal judge? Now, if you're going to still try to make a living off low-hanging fruit of people that can't, you know, they love those $1,000 bond issues. They're not a risk of flight. So anyway, that's where we are. It's not going to be easy. And I could listen to you all afternoon. Let me brag on James. James came into criminal justice about 4 years ago.
2011, my first.
2011. Okay, time flies. In fact, 45 years in the legislature has gone by pretty damn fast. But you're really knowledgeable and your heart's in the right place and are making a difference. So that's what keeps me going is James's position. Jake is still a damn good bird dog name, you know. But the bail bond issue that you asked about is not going to be easy because there's huge dollars involved. The bail bonds has an active lobby. They get to know their members. And quite frankly, it was difficult to get it out of the Senate. I think they probably decided to let it out of the Senate and try to focus on killing it in the House. But we're geared up. We're ready. The facts are on our side. So thank you.
Well, I would simply say follow the law now. I think it's Criminal Code Procedure 17.05. It already says you're supposed to do individualized risk assessments. You just follow the law now. I mean, it's great, I think, to put some of the blame on the bail bond industry, and maybe they're doing some stuff, but this is really local elected officials not following the law that we have now. So I would just say, really, you don't need Senator Wittmeyer and I to do anything. You can just go back, and I think it's like 5 things you must do in order to assess bail. I'm agnostic on the public safety assessments. I mean, if you represent a county, I have one county, Newton County. I mean, Billy Rolls may arrest and detain 2 people a night, maybe. I don't know what a PSA does for him, but that magistrate, you assess the person's risk factor. You can assess their prior criminal history and make a decision based on individualized scenario. This mechanical bail thing where you just say you did a Class A misdemeanor, your bail is this and you must pay this, that's mechanical. That's always been unconstitutional. None of this is new information.
And we probably don't have time today, but at some point in time we ought to review parole consideration. As long as the state, as its #1 criteria of whether you should be paroled is the nature of the crime that you committed 20, 30 years ago, we're going to have an overpopulated prison. The long sentences for drug offenses, I saw a gentleman in Lockhart lockup. He was making optical glasses. It's one of the few prison industry programs. And I said, what are you here for? From Houston. What are you here for? drug trafficking, low levels of, I think, marijuana. I said, how long? 15 years. He said, I said, how long you been here? 7. He said, Senator, if I stay here much longer, I'm going to lose my family. I've learned my lesson. Age does wonders for people while they're covering. So he had done 7 of 15, but because of the nature of the crime, they'd never let him go back to his family. We really need to address that. We've got geriatric people that are running up hundreds of millions of dollars. Galveston, every year I get the 10 most expensive inmates. We have several over $500,000 a year. They're bedridden. They pose no danger to society, but because 20 or 30 years ago they were bad, they can't parole them. So parole considerations need to be rated as a risk assessment, because we got a lot of people that have gotten old and sick that do not pose a risk to society anymore. And see, what I want to do is the millions of dollars we save on not incarcerating them, we apply it back into public safety. And we make society safer by not wasting any dollars. And we also could do better treatment of those that we have locked up.
I want to just build on that a little bit. When I saw I don't mean to get too semantic on this, but I saw the title of this panel, something about is justice cost effective or something like that. And I was like, oh, what the heck does that mean? But this actually comes up all the time in state work. You've got someone who's been sentenced, for earlier in their life, and they're in prison at age 70, and they may have done something pretty bad. And so, Representative Madden, now this has become a catchphrase around the country too. Is this someone we're mad at or someone we're afraid of? Yeah, he stole it from you. So, right? So, is this a justice case or is this a public safety case? And let's just be clear about it. It's okay, of course, to do justice. This is the justice system. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's just be clear about what we're achieving with it. And now states are spending a whole lot of money on this, a whole lot of money. And push comes to shove. And so state policymakers, I'm not talking about Texas specifically, I'm saying this is a wrestling match that's going on within the minds of individual legislators and governors and judges around the country. They're saying, I've got a limited pot of money to deal with. I can use that money to buy an extra year, the 81st year of someone's life in prison, or I could spend that money fighting crime. What's worth? Now, and that's a case where it's a true justice case, right? When I worked at DOJ, you mentioned this earlier, there was a case when I was there, this is under Attorney General Gonzalez, where they reopened a cold case in one of these really serious civil rights cases from the 60s. And this is something, you can't let those things go untouched. Totally get it. In some of these other cases, this is a drug dealer, and you take that drug dealer, a street-level dealer, off the street. You guys believe in markets, right? This is the TPPF. You believe in markets. How do markets work? If you take a mattress salesman off the street, are mattresses not going to get sold? No, mattresses get sold. If you take a coffee vendor off the street, does coffee not get sold? No. Okay, you take a drug dealer off the street, does drugs not get sold? No, of course drugs get sold. So you've held someone accountable, but you haven't changed the drug market at all. The drug market keeps going. So do you want to reduce drug consumption or the harms associated with the drug market? Well, let's spend the money on that. It's not saying don't hold those people accountable. Of course, there's plenty of ways to hold those people accountable. But I think this is at the heart of some of this work.
Well, I think also at the heart of it, Jake, is all of us in this room in our posture in thinking about this. The reason why we have a lot of these geriatric folks locked up, Senator Wittmeyer, is because as a member of the legislature, I will get a call from a constituent. First of all, incredulous, she thinks, that we're even sending her family a notice that we are considering this particular justice-involved person's parole. And then they go through the story. It is a horrible story of a guy coming in and shooting someone's father 35, 40 years ago. And then the constituent tells me, Rep, I don't care, he can rot in jail. Well, you say you're the TPPF and you're nonpartisan and you're non-political, but I'm not. So what do I do? I get on the phone and I call the BPP because I need to be responsive to my constituents and say, I got a call from Miss So-and-so and so. She's not happy that she's gotten this letter that you guys are going to do parole. And while I'm giving the call to BPP, she's calling the DA, she's calling the sentencing court, she's calling the sheriff. All of those people are also notified, and they also contact the BPP and say, do not let this person out. So a lot of these people are in because we're calling BPP, telling the BPP, please keep them in. We don't care if they rot and die in jail. So that's really the reason you have them.
Well, and one of the interesting bills that will be up this session will actually look at making some people eligible for parole who committed their offense when they were 14, 15, 16, 17, and I'm working with Lindsay, TCJC, and others on that, but it's the second look policy because you've got to now serve 40 years, even at such a young age. So there's about 2,000 people that could be affected by that, and most states have made it about 15 or 20 years. Based on the fact that when you're 14, 15, 16, you simply don't have the same level of judgment and self-restraint that we would hope adults would have. So that's another area where actually the parole board would, I think, feel confident in releasing some of those people who have already served 15, 20 years and are not a threat to anyone. So I hope we do focus on that. Let me look, do we have some questions and comments here? Oh, okay. But yeah, get your questions and comments ready as well. Now, you brought up clemency, which I think you were kind of referring more to non-disclosure and record sealing.
Non-disclosure
Yeah.
and expungements. Again, I'm very fascinated. A lot of people that are against clemency, against expungements, against curing criminal records. They're the same people on Sunday morning. They're at the altar wanting forgiveness from their Savior, Jesus Christ, but on Monday or Tuesday, they don't want to even forgive someone for a criminal offense, say, 35, 40 years ago that didn't hurt anybody. So that's pretty much all I got to say about it. I mean, you know, again, just go across the street and tell those people who go to the Church of Christ, go to the Catholic Church, and say they're saved by the blood of Jesus. We would like to show a little forgiveness for some folks that need a new life.
So for those of you who don't know, in the last two sessions, we have passed some legislation, partly thanks to you, that for the first time, people with a conviction, not just deferred adjudication, could get their record sealed for nonviolent misdemeanors, and for a single one. So last session, that was extended to a first-time DWI, and it was made retroactive. But I think we should also look at, like, second-time nonviolent misdemeanors, especially if it was something that was decades ago. And then, you know, the state jail felony, less than a gram, which is a very common, possession of less than a gram, which is a very common offense. And, you know, again, if you had a conviction for that 30 years ago, there's no way to get that off of your record. And, of course, that also does bring us to the state jail topic. And so that's something we haven't touched on today. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, back in 1993, Texas created the state jail system by taking some third-degree felonies down to this new state jail felony category and then moving up some Class A misdemeanors to a state jail felony. And it was different from the prison system because you had to serve 2 years flat time. We subsequently, several sessions ago, put in a 20% earn time, which some folks can get in state jail by completing programs, but still there's no parole. But unfortunately, the recidivism rates are very high, over 60%. So I just wanted to get your thoughts of what we could do as far as state jails are concerned.
Well, first of all, having been there and passed that in '93, it was heavy on treatment. It was actually a condition of probation. In fact, it was going to be automatic state jail as a condition of probation. And George Bush used that against Ann Richards, that you were giving all these people automatic probation. And the truth was, the probation terms were going to be tougher than the revolving door that they've got when they went to prison. So it got caught up in politics. But through the years, the state jails have been useful. It was part of our building program. We came up with that concept because we needed housing so bad. Like I told you earlier, we were doing 1 month for every year. You'd do 10 years in 10 months. It was a revolving date. We let in we turned loose a rapist to put a car thief in there. It was totally dysfunctional. Oh, it was bad. So anyway, it has evolved, though, through budget cuts to where now if you go to a state jail, and you can do flat time, day for day, no parole on the backside, but we've done away with the treatment. So now, in lieu of that probation that you ought to want and get treatment, stay close to home, the bad guys, the convicted folks are saying, well, just give me 6 months, or they plea bargain a year in a state jail. It's just warehousing them. So one, we've got to sit down, James and I in a working group, come up with how to transform state jails at this stage to where, one, first there's an incentive not to go, you know, by making the conditions of probation better, so you don't plead to a state jail. But if you go to a state jail, you need to have treatment. I think there ought to be some incentive to get your education and your treatment there and cut that sentence down, and even look at the possibility of some supervision when you come out of a state jail. But right now, it's a hard crowd, the recidivism rate. You know, treatment works, and I hope we don't have to spend a lot of time, even in the legislature, convincing people. Treatment is shown. That's how we've closed, what, 6 or 8 prisons through the wide variety of treatment programs that Jerry and others came up with. So the state jails need a serious redo, because the recidivism rate, you know, every time you have recidivism, not only are you wasting taxpayer dollars, but you have a new victim when somebody violates the law again. So, James, I look forward to working with you on working on state jails.
And I think your probation chief down in Harris County, Dr. May, has a very good model for us to build off of statewide. But this, again, goes to show what I was talking about earlier. I think its recidivism rate is about 60, 65%, something like that. If we had a failure rate like that in TxDOT with roads, okay, you know, there would be all these protests, all this money being spent, but it would be all on the TV. But in this case here, this is not on TV, and everybody just seems to be okay with it. It's fascinating.
It's the most broken part of TDCJ. The state
Probably state government, period, almost, except for CPS.
The list is too long in
Okay.
state government. But no, I mean, yeah, don't get me started on state government in general.
But
I drove by, you know what? You want to just see how elections matter. You went into that apparatus. So I'm driving Monday up here. I go through Columbus, and the DPS office is right there on the right in small town of Columbus. The lines are out the door for the DPS licensing office. You know why? Because you can't get your driver's license renewed in Harris County without a 3 or 4 hour wait. That's the truth, folks, 3 or 4 hours. So people are driving out of Houston to Columbus on I-10 to take their driver's license. It's crazy as hell. I mean, that people don't have the luxury. They take off to go get their driver's license, and then they wait 3 and 4 hours, and that's a statewide phenomenon. So, and why the legislature doesn't make that a priority?
And I think some of it, I'm not saying, I don't know what degree of it, Senator, could be contributed back to the DRP, because as you're trying to get yourself out of the driver responsibility program, you have to go back and forth to the driver's license office.
Do
new documents, different paperwork. So they're in the line with you when you're just trying to get a simple renewal. So these scenarios do have consequences. Why you have long lines, why your property taxes are going through the roof, is because we're just doing a lot of bad things, maybe in criminal justice.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, if you have 3 or more speeding tickets or a single DWI or other moving violations, you have your license suspended through the driver responsibility program, even if you paid off those tickets. This is like an add-on punishment. And of course, if you can afford it, you can pay to have it reinstated. It could be thousands of dollars. If you can't, then you end up, most of the people actually just drive with their license suspended, which gets, then they're arrested for that, and it just starts the whole cycle again.
And that's after you've paid your fine and spent your time in jail for what any of those moving violations are. But the state just continues every year give you a driver responsibility fee, and it's to fund trauma care, which is critical, but we ought to do it the right way out of our general budget. And I, quite frankly, and someone actually filed a lawsuit the other day to challenge, I think once you've been penalized and paid your fine, the state doesn't have a right to, it's concerned double jeopardy, to come and keep popping you every year. It becomes an economic crime. So they can't pay it, then they lose their driver's license. That means we're faced with uninsured motorists, and it's just one bad program. And both parties' platforms actually call for repealing it. Yeah. And Lord knows I pay attention to both of those platforms.
Yeah, I do too. That nice lady over there.
I guess we'll go open early. Go ahead, yeah.
I actually wanted to ask, what do you see coming with the driver's responsibility program? It's been a topic of conversation to actually make some improvements in the program? Or
No, we need to
Adjust
abolish
the
it.
No, no,
We're
we
we're
need to
talking about
abolish it,
40 million.
yeah.
James pointed out, it's a revenue source that they use in other parts of the budget. The Hospital Association lobbies hard because trauma care is critical. We all depend on trauma care. But you can't do it on the backs of people that don't have any money. It's not working. They're not paying that fee. What they're doing is losing 1.7 million of them. It's a public safety factor. So what we need to do, just like we fund highways and schools and the prison system, we need to fund, if the legislature believes trauma care is a priority, which I think it should be. Now, there's been an effort the last session to do away with the driver responsibility program and put a fee on all the other moving violations, just an additional fine, which I'm not in favor of that because you're hitting the same poor people. You know, I understand that if you want to spin it, well, they shouldn't speed and they shouldn't get in trouble. I got it. They shouldn't have, and they paid a penalty and a fine. Now, let's don't keep partnering with a broken program. It's like I said, everybody's aware of it. I actually talked to the lieutenant governor about it this morning. It's a top priority of mine because it's endangering every one of us to be facing people that have no insurance and no license. And you can't believe, you know, you can't make them pay it. And he said, John, I hope we can do something about that this session. And we got more money than we thought we were because of oil prices. Of course, they've gone south on us now. But as Hager pointed out a couple of days ago, we're going to have more funds to spend than we thought we would. And that ought to be one of the priorities. And I know James will do his part.
Hi, I'm Susan Fletcher. I serve on the Commissioner's Court in Fulton County. One of our highest costs that's rising above the population inflation would be our indigent defense costs. And so I'm looking at pre-adjudication side and the bail bond reform that you were discussing. Is there a tool that is like, so we know that they're not a flight risk or a risk to themselves or a risk to others, that so we can accelerate that process? Because you have people that may not be indigent, but they get arrested and then they are in jail and they become indigent. So we have to end up paying that bill as well. And so how can we help on that side
Come
of it?
testify.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Happy to do
you're
it.
better than anything I could say or James could say. You're a practitioner. You're on the ground. When we have, and let me tell you what, the bail bond industry, they create crime victims groups. It's funded by them, by the way. And they're going to come forward and say, you know, it's not a risk. The bad guys, the dangerous people get out. You can't be, they don't stop a cartel member, a gang member. He just gets a high bond and he pays it. It's the low-level nonviolent that do not pose a risk. So, but boy, they make some noise. So you come testify, please.
Now, the indigent defense is a critical issue. Thanks for bringing that up, and you make an excellent point. The county taxpayers pay most of that. We have the Indigent Defense Commission, which does a good job. But you know, the reality is also if we divert people pre-trial, like they're doing with the Hearst County Reintegration Court, that also reduces indigent defense costs because we're resolving it soon, getting the person into treatment for their addiction, and they never have the charge or the conviction. Let's see, you want to go down here? Oh, down there, up there? Okay.
Thanks for what y'all have been doing for criminal justice reform. I run a pretty big activist organization, so I think it's great that we are doing something about people that do technically break the law and their low-level crimes. I have another issue I'm wondering if you guys are addressing, and that is people who have committed no crime, except for maybe pissing off the police. And they end up getting arrested. They end up having to post jail only to have charges dropped, but they've already lost that money. They've lost that hundreds or even thousands of dollars because they've been arrested for a fake crime, charged with a fake crime, only to have the DA say, this is stupid, no, we're dropping charges, he didn't do anything wrong, but they don't get that money back. Are y'all thinking about addressing that at all as well?
I'm going to be honest, I hadn't thought about it till you just mentioned it. Obviously, it's unfortunate. Under the scenario that you painted, I hope, you know, we have accountability for our law enforcement. That's why we have elections. You know, you have mayors, police chiefs, and there's going to be unfortunate circumstances, but I'll put some thought into it. But I'm not sure the state, and from my perspective, is in a position to start writing wrongfully arrests. We do, you know, our state responsibility at the prison system. If you're wrongly sentenced and spend incarcerated, we have a really pretty, of course, I don't know, money will never replace time lost from society and your family, but we do pop the state pretty good to try to attempt to give a wrongfully incarcerated person a second chance on his or her feeding. But to go into every local community and correct the wrongful arrest of their police, that almost gets down to the local council or county to regulate. And but I don't know how you'd ever put money back for people that have spent money when they shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. But, you know, we'll keep talking.
Ditto.
That guy right there has been trying like hell.
Okay. One other issue, I think you're mostly discussing citizens, but Austin is no longer even a sanctuary city. It's a freedom city.
Yeah.
And that's posing a huge threat to our safety.
Freedom
in which-
City?
Freedom City.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
it's like California, where illegals can, as long as it's nonviolent, as I understand it, the police can't do anything, can't arrest them.
Can it arrest whom now? I want to get that other.
Nice.
Okay.
Illegal?
The illegal
Okay,
folks who-
yeah, we don't like that scenario, and I think last session, the legislature passed a piece of legislation prohibiting the practice of so-called sanctuary cities. But again, look, I come up here for about 140 days. Maybe I stay a few days later, but then I go home, and it's all about local elections after that. So, you know, we don't have, well, we prohibit the practice of sanctuary cities, yes.
So we've already prohibited them, and I don't know, quite frankly, what one is, but let me tell you, when we were debating that, every major city police chief begged us not to pass that bill. Because whether you like it or not, we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of undocumented, longtime residents of the state of Texas. The worst thing we can do is have a policy that they don't feel free to reach out to law enforcement. It allows domestic abuse to be a practice. It does not allow someone that knows about gang activity to reach out. So what we need is a national immigration policy that works. So I hear your concern, but I'm also listening to law enforcement. It says we need a relationship with the undocumented community. And I'm not talking about the cartel, and I'm not talking about human traffickers. I'm talking people that have been here for years and pay taxes, go to church, and are really some fine people.
I agree with that, but the fact
Well-
is that
If they violate the law, they should be punished. In fact, you can't oh ma'am, we have 12,000 undocumented people locked up in the state prison system. Can you believe that? 12,000. The feds used to pay us about $40 million a year to take care of them, and they've pretty much eliminated that. We have about 2,000 Mexican citizens, nonviolent, parole eligible, ICE detainers on them that are incarcerated today. You know what John Wittmeyer thinks after working on this 20 years? You know why they don't parole them? They're nonviolent. It's because they do the work. Somebody has to run these prisons. I can't prove it, but this ain't my first rodeo. So we got about 2,000 nonviolent. If they were paroled, they'd be deported, and we don't, because you know why? They're compliant. They cook the meals. They clean the floors at a cost of millions of dollars to taxpayers. So, you know, I could spend the rest of the afternoon on how undocumented impact. We have some horrible crimes committed by undocumented, but we need a grown-up discussion about the entire immigration system and how it impacts criminal justice. So anyway, thank you for bringing that up.
Let's go over here then.
Why do we have illegals incarcerated in our jails? Why aren't they like deported?
Because they commit crimes, often violent crimes, and the crime victims groups don't want to send them home. One, they're afraid some countries will release them or they would return. Now, the problem is When I studied this a couple years ago, we have about 100 different countries with their citizens incarcerated. So I understand the argument when our border's not secure that the Mexicans or Central Americans might come back, but we got Nigerians, we've got Afghanistans, we got French citizens, and so I said, well, how the hell are they getting across the ocean? And so it's a pretty weak argument, but as I think the border becomes more and more secure, we were told this morning in a Senate meeting that we will spend $800 million again on border security, even with the feds beefing up by many times the Border Patrol. So why do we incarcerate them? Because people, as James talked about that constituency, if an undocumented harms your family, there's a crime victims effort that you've got to incarcerate them here. But I told you about that nonviolent population that I'm convinced are kept incarcerated because our prison population in the last 20 years, with our tough sentences, our population has gotten tougher and tougher. You can't have a rapist or a serial murderer. You can't have those people working because they're a risk. They will escape or attempt to. So you use your nonviolent, low-level, compliant individuals, and that's going to be largely the nonviolent Mexican citizens. Yeah, I mean, I ain't calling
Okay.
them people.
Bill?
Chairman White, would you be in favor of legislation that would require a judge to at least consider whether or not a defendant is a primary caretaker of underage children in the sentencing that they perform? Not that they make a decision based on it, but they at least consider it, given that if a primary caretaker, man or woman, is incarcerated, then largely the cost of taking care of the children falls to the state.
I think they can do that now. Judges don't like to be told what to do. So local officials don't like to be told what to do. I'm interested in looking at it. I've been talking with some stakeholders about it. I think there's a way to do it, but judges just don't like to be told what to do. Something about how they think, and if you tell them that they have to think about something, then that kind of throws them off over here. And I've got about 6 or 8 judges back home. So we're going to look at that, but that definitely, all of that always needs to be a factor.
So I'm a medical student here in Texas. I'm actually applying for my psychiatry residency right now, and I was disturbed to learn that some of the biggest providers of inpatient mental health services in Texas are our county jails. And I know that there are a number of solutions that are being looked at right now, like pretrial diversions and crisis response teams and other programs like that. I'm just wondering if y'all can sort of lay out what the future looks like for mental health care in the jail and prison populations.
Well, it's probably our number one breakdown, and it's not new. It's been around. I was at Bentob, which is our charitable hospital in Harris County, about 2 weeks ago, watching from 5:30 to 11 the arrivals. When you have a mental health issue, and it's largely our homeless population too, by the way, most of our homeless population in Houston is bursting. It seems as we go over here on 7th Street in Austin, you'll see the same thing. That's largely mental health. A lot of them are people that have been released from prison. But anyway, they go to that Harris County hospital, and they call over to the Harris County Psychiatric Hospital, which has only about 100 beds for all of Harris County. They don't have any capacity. So you know what I got to witness? And they don't announce it. They just drug them. They just keep them there in the hallways. They give them drugs to calm them down, and they get them stabilized, and then they release them. Likewise, they do in the jail. You know, what happened years ago, they did away, the legislature quit funding community mental health services. So what happens is a bipolar or schizophrenic individual has an episode, starts harming the family or the neighbors, so they call law enforcement. Then the person assaults law enforcement, and welcome to the criminal justice system. And that's a huge part. We documented, of the 150,000, now we're down, I don't know what it is today, 145,000 inmates. A few of us documented about 8 years ago, out of the 150,000 at that time, we identified 32,000. If you don't remember another thing I said today, you ought to remember this. We found 32,000 inmates that had been in a mental health program before they ever committed a crime. But because of that reduction in state services, They can't get counseling. They can't get their meds. And they have an altercation with neighbors or family, and then law enforcement, welcome to TDCJ. I mean, it is a moral shame that this state, with its money, we're not a poor state by any stretch, but we don't have a mental health program. So you go to the criminal justice system. Same way for the juvenile system. Do you know how many families I have had to deal with? They'll call me and I say, they say, I got a 14-year-old son, a single mom. He's terrorizing the entire family. I don't know what to do with him. I will call juvenile probation director to see if there's something they can do. He said, John, Senator, I can't unless he commits a crime. Tom Brooks, who is our director in Harris County, he would, as a good human, go talk to the young man. I would arrange for the mother to bring him to the office, and Tom would try to talk to him. But at the end of the day, I've seen families told they've got to commit a crime. And then you might get some service. And then the problem, we don't have a long-term solution. They get stabilized and then released. So, you know, that's what I was saying earlier. I can give a speech on the state's not meeting its responsibilities. And I would almost say mental health is at the top of the deal. And it's a public safety issue. And you pay, if you don't pay now, you're going to pay later. Because ultimately we spend even more millions incarcerating them, and you may end up paying with your life.
Jake, you want to answer?
Yeah. We did a bunch of work in Louisiana back in 2016, 2017. Followed that up with a really nice event up on Capitol Hill. Governor Edwards and then a sheriff, Weber, came and joined us, and he said remarks that were right in line with what the senator was just saying. And sort of paraphrasing here, he said, you know, I don't have ambulances pull up in front of my jail and drop off people with broken legs or, you know, a dislocated shoulder, but I have the equivalent of mental health needs. Just pulling up out front, and it's a person suffering from some mental health crisis or need. And to your point then, Senator, you know, what's the average length of stay in a jail? A couple days, you know, maybe a couple weeks. So maybe stabilization, and then right back out on the street. And that's not a public safety strategy.
You know, one of another challenges, and it applies to mental health, but the entire reentry. How in the world do you turn somebody loose from Huntsville after he or she's been incarcerated for 10 years with a $100 bill? They spend it before they get out of Huntsville. Then they go to the streets of Houston with no money. They come to Austin with no money. They become the homeless, and we darn near force them, because they know how to commit crime. They know how to rob or hold you up. And I just, you know, I would much rather spend money on reentry than the guys show up in my driveway and hold me up. I mean, it's a public safety issue. We ought to prepare people to go back into society. We ought to do a better job while we got them. Education, treatment, it's job skills, et cetera. But how do we turn people loose at a Harris County jail? You know what time they turn people loose at Harris County jail? And I guess, James, we need to pass a law.
I thought we changed that. Midnight?
They turn them loose at midnight.
I thought we changed it.
At midnight. You know why? Because the jail's overcrowded, so they get credit for the next day at 12:01. So they turn the homeless, the broke, the mental health challenges to the streets of Houston at 12:01. And I don't know why Justin was my officer. We need to draw up a bill. We tried 2 years ago when we tried to at least require, after the sun came up, give them a fighting chance, 8 o'clock in the morning, or at 5 o'clock the day before. We tried to actually pass that you get credit, run the clock forward, and you can get out at 5 o'clock. But to turn people loose at 12:01 is what do you expect? They're going to go down the street, and then they get arrested for vagrancy, or they harm someone. So anyway, back to, we've done a lot of great things that some of us want to take credit for, but I really say we've got a lot left to do.
Well, and then they have over 2,000 people in Louisiana, which isn't good for reentry.
Oh, you ready for that? Harris County, because of overcrowding. Yeah. Families started calling me. We can't find our son at the Harris County jail. I said, what do you mean? Well, we go down there. He's not there. He's not on the roster. Harris County, they blame it on Harvey flooding. You know, you can't blame the rest of all your problems the rest of your life on Harvey, okay? It's poor management of the jail, not a good bail policy. This was in August when I ran across it. There's 700 people being housed in Louisiana that belong in the Harris County jail. Some of them have not even been to court yet. Some were 2 weeks away from trial, so they can't be with their family, and they for sure can't be with their lawyer. And I'm going to pop the sheriff in the commissioner's court probably next week in an open letter saying you cannot, one, keep blaming Harvey for all your problems, and number two, it's unconscionable that you would take a Harris. They haven't been convicted of anything, but they're being housed not even on the Texas-Louisiana border. It's worse. They're on the Mississippi-Louisiana border, 6 hours from home.
I got the same calls. I'm sitting in Woodville.
We'll fix it, James.
Okay, we will. But to my friend's question there, the senator has done a very, very good job outlining the challenges and what we need to do in this mental health space as it relates to criminal justice. But I think therein lies probably the answer. We're relying on criminal justice to deliver these services. And maybe we should continue to beef up, because I've served on the House Select Committee on Mental Health in 2016, and then this last interim on the House Select Committee on Opioid and Substance Abuse, and we're beginning to get more funding in there on the criminal justice, not necessarily on the criminal justice side. Obviously, I have an interest in that, but we need to start dealing with our fellow citizens that are challenged with these issues younger, and before they have an intersection with the criminal justice system.
Yeah, try our public schools. The person that shot the folks in Santa Fe, everyone knew. It hadn't been widely written about, but they knew he had a mental health issue. He'd had a run-in with another student in class. Young lady drilled him, bullied him, and he had an emotional problem. They knew about it. He was wearing a trench coat in the middle of 90-degree weathers. So we've got to do early intervention. The problem is they don't intervene, because what do you do with a person under our current resource allocation? So it goes all the way back to our school days. Half of the conduct in the tragedies in our education, nearly every time you read about a mass shooter, he or she, that's one thing, but I don't know if we got any women that have done that for some reason. They've nearly always been identified with an emotional problem, a mental health problem, and was not addressed. You pay now, or you're going to pay later, and you may pay with your life.
Yeah. Nice.
Well,
you're wrap it up?
Well, no, sorry we're not ending on a more cheerful note
Okay.
than mass shootings.
No, the nice lady there, yes.
Yeah, that lady. And that lady.
School in Huntsville, Texas, and when I was there, I got to visit some of the facilities, our prison facilities there. I saw that some of them have training programs for the inmates. However, I've come across people who are not allowed to get their licenses once they get out of prison in the same field that they studied in prison. Do you foresee the state legislator talking about occupational licensing reform?
Yes, we'll continue to talk about that. TDCJ has scaled down a lot of those job training programs where you would have a problematic occupational licensing situation. But again, many of you out there, you know, your doctors, your psychiatrists, your attorneys, your accountants, it's your boards that are fighting us on this. I mean, so, I mean, I hate to just throw it back on you, but it's, but it's your boards that are fighting us on this and saying that we have to know what somebody did 35 years ago that they smoked the joint if they can keep your financial books. And I've got the reports, and they say we've got to know this stuff, we got to do this stuff in order to maintain the integrity of the profession.
And I think you were talking about driver's license, which I've been raising Cain about, and they've
Oh, you're talking about
they're supposed to be doing it,
license?
but they come up with every excuse in the world. First, they won't tell you TDCJ is understaffed because they built the prisons in the wrong place. Because of the oil industry, they can't hire just correction officers. So every time you have a new program that makes sense, they got to find the personnel for it. So remember I told you the reentry is one of the biggest challenges. It ought to be a crime that you release somebody without a Social Security card and a driver's license so he or she can go to work when they get to their destination. So we're going to keep doing the best we can, but it's another flaw.
Thank you so much for your question.
Okay, well,
I'll take
do we have
hers.
one more, or do you think we need to wrap up? Oh, we do have to wrap up. I'm so sorry. But we have 2 more panels on criminal justice. My colleague Derek Cohen's moderating one, who's here, I believe. So go for that. And then our plenary session with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is starting momentarily. So thanks again.